Well, again, thanks for joining me, Joanna. And so as I mentioned, this is part of a work on digital satire that I'm doing, and particularly to the case of Latinx. Well, at the time was still Latino. I don't think the Latinx, the X was that prevalent at the time that you began, but it's about digital humor, digital satire. We can debate which term you feel more comfortable with. Um, so let me start with kind of an overarching question, which is, you started with Joanna, your work became popular with Joanna Rants in Flama, no, from Univision's website, and then you created a lot of content for your own YouTube channel, and then you've worked in different platforms and for different media outlets, including your recent Hamster and Gretel for Disney, right? The show that is out. So how would you describe your evolution as a comedian throughout these years? Like what has changed, what has remained the same, what have been your interests, and how has that evolved? So let me start with this overarching question, so then maybe we can go back to this at the end of the interview, but I think it's a good way to, to start mapping what you've done and what you think about your work.
Sure. So I guess my career began once I graduated college. I went to Second City, which is a big comedy theater in Chicago, and I started my career there. And it's an important step in my career because although I honed in on comedy being my main outlet and it being my professional outlet, I was very isolated in an environment where I was the only Latina. I was one of two Jewish people in my program. I had to blend in because, como tú bien sabes, satire in particular, you need to understand context in order to understand the humor. So I sort of distanced myself from my own identity a little bit. And just started doing comedy for comedy's sake, like mathematical comedy, set up punchline. I moved to New York. I did a lot of Upright Citizens Brigade theater stuff. And then I started doing stand-up. And in stand-up, who you are and your point of view is incredibly important. Maybe in improv, you can play anyone. In sketch, you can play a character. But in stand-up, you are who you are. And your point of view might be the most important part of how you frame your jokes. So once I started doing stand-up, that's when, someone at Univision saw my work and I got hired at Flama. But even at Flama, it took a while for me to get in front of the camera. At Flama, I was more of a producer. I was working with existing talent at the time. What I mean by existing talent, I mean like relatively famous YouTubers who had their own platform and trying to figure out ways that their brand could fit into our brand. And it was going all right. Until one day I had an idea for a video that I wanted to do. And my boss was like, yeah, sure. I mean, here's $500, like make it. And at that moment, I was hesitant because I was told my whole life that who I was and what I looked like and how I presented was not the norm. Therefore, no Latino would watch me and want to and see themselves reflected in my experience. But whatever, I got $500 and I made a video called Things White Latinos Are Sick of Hearing, which just basically charted things that I went through in my life being Venezuelan and in the States. And it went viral. And it was then that, I guess if I'm writing a book about my life, that I'd say this is a turning point where me as a character understood that looking within my own identity and within myself and the specificity of myself was enough for it to be universally accepted or universally successful. And from there, I started doing Joanna Rants, where, I started speaking more directly to camera. It was a straight to camera address, kind of like a vlog, which, very 2000s-y, but vlog with a little bit more of a late night style, a little bit more produced. And from there is where my career began, really taking, like forming foundations. And then from there, everything I've worked on, I've written for, shows about firemen dudes in Seattle for a show called Tacoma FD. That's not necessarily who I am, but I've been able to filter myself through filter myself into the scripts that I write. And now, in Hamster and Gretel, I've incorporated a lot of my culture and a lot of the things I learned during my time at Flama, that specificity of culture, into, a world building of a cartoon. So, that was long, but we can get more into detail, but that's pretty much, and where I am now is like lost. I don't know what's next, but hopefully something new and challenging comes up soon.
Yeah. So you mentioned one thing, and actually, so I'm going to skip the other question because I want to just go with the flow of the conversation. How it was for you important to showcase the specificity of these cultures, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I think Joanna Rants became popular for, and then I think many other outlets were trying to do that too. That became, I guess, a Latinx millennial kind of statement, that put us all together in one bag. The result is different, and people did it differently. Why do you think it was important to show this diversity of Latino cultures? What is what's the role of showing that in entertainment media? How you see that as something valuable?
Well, I can answer this question both ways, in a very personal way, and then in a way that I feel sort of as a subjective way, as an outsider looking in. So in a personal way, I was tired of this word Latino. I was just like, what if I don't fit into this? Like, I don't feel anyone does. And I came from Venezuela. I moved from Venezuela to the States when I was 18. And suddenly I was thrown this identity, and I tried to accept it, but then I felt like it erased my own identity. And it felt like, and erroneously, I felt that Latina and Latino separated me from the specificity of my culture. But then I started realizing a lot of people felt the same way. So once, and this is a little bit what happened at Flama, and this is a little story. One of the first videos we made, a marketing team came to tell us like what Latinos love and who Latinos are. And they gave us a sheet and they walked us through it. And they said, Latinos are majority Mexican. Latinos speak Spanish at home, but English at work or school. Latinos hold their culture very close to their heart, and Latinos over-index on zombies, as in they like zombie movies. So the team was like, well, we should make a video with all this stuff. Let's have a Mexican family who speaks English and then Spanish with each other. And there's a zombie apocalypse. And we did that. We got all those things that the majority are, tried to make comedy out of it. And it was so bad, we had to take it off. We had to take it off YouTube. So that is like trying to create comedy and art through statistics. And I think a lot of people see the word Latino as almost like a statistic. That's where the word Latino came from, in order to create a statistic for people like us. But art doesn't work like that. And I felt that the moment I remember watching a show, I think it was Jane the Virgin, and there being like an arepa stand in one of the shots, and it was a brief shot. And I got so excited. I was like, oh my God, an arepa stand. It's not just a Latino stand, it's an arepa stand. That means that they're Venezuelan. Oh my God, it's so exciting. And I was like, this feeling of wanting to be reflected and my culture being like represented and specified, and not as this like como que amorphous blob of identity that doesn't really have any specificity. I was like, I want to be as specific as possible. So it isn't things Latinos or whatever. It's things Jewish Latinos are this, things Peruvian Americans are this. The moment we got more and more and more and more specific, the more successful it was. But this would have been impossible without the internet, because the internet's it's very different than on stage. On stage, you can be very specific, but your audience is likely not as specific as maybe you'd like it to be. Online content, you can make the most specific content in the world, and it will likely not get lost in the sea of content, and it will find the people that it represents. So like for example, and this doesn't even have to do, like, I made a video about Latino weddings versus American weddings when I got married in the States. And okay, that isn't Peruvian, that isn't Mexican, that isn't Salvadorian. That's probably a Latino that might be marrying a white person in America. That's a specific cultural experience that went viral beyond the Latino scope, even though it was very specifically a Venezuelan-American marrying
Long Island, right?
a Long Island guy. But pero como que I didn't shy away from making it specific. Tequeños, the type of songs, everything is specific. If I had made it amorphous and Latino, it probably wouldn't have been as successful because it wouldn't have felt real.
Well, that's actually another question that I had. So you had all these videos that showcase diversity, that you do actually not just superficial diversity, but you actually deal a lot into detail. And then you do this contrast of American cultures versus Latino cultures. And then again, within that, you have this subtext that it's also some sort of a specificity. I thought that was very interesting. That one was not just Latinos versus American, it was Venezuelan-American, Latina, Long Island. So, it's still for people who know a little bit of that area, you can get it, the type, right? So what did you learn from this contrast of, can we still contrast Latinos cultures with American cultures? That's still a valid contrast. What did you learn from thinking through?
I think a lot of the humor and comedy I had seen had contrasted Latino and American culture in a way that sort of punched down at Latino culture. So it would be like, I señor, it'd be like, oh, I don't understand what she's saying. And like, oh, she's wacky because she's Latina. Like the audience was laughing at the Latino being an outsider. So when I made these contrasting videos, I wanted it to feel like the opposite. Like I wanted Latinos to watch it and feel like, oh, perhaps the American here is the fish out of water and is the one that isn't really understanding what we know and what we understand and what we like about our culture. So it was flipping that a little bit, and perhaps subconsciously at first, and then quite consciously as I began making more and more of this content. Like I wanted people to feel like, and that's the power of satire. And I think one of the reasons satire is so powerful is because you know that in order to get it and for the person next to you to laugh at it, you have to have a shared experience. You have something in common. This commonality is, I think, what propelled a lot of these it's funny to think this, but you're contrasting people, but like ultimately it was to unify and to make us feel like we were one, and that all culture could be funny to laugh with and not at. It isn't the butt of the joke. It's funny. It's funny to see someone uncomfortable with something that you find so natural. Like I did a video called Eternal Venezuelan Birthday Song, and it's probably one of the most specific videos I've ever made because only Venezuelans or people that know Venezuelans know, and people that have been invited to birthday parties of Venezuelans know that our birthday song is very long. It's like an 8-minute song. I made a video about this. Probably like I just assumed it wasn't going to do well. It did very well. And in it, the main character you're following is this American guy who was like stuck in a horror film because this song won't end. Now you would think that it's like, oh, you're the perspective of the American. You're thinking that this is like, that these people are weird. It's more like, oh, the American is odd for not knowing the extensive nature of our birthday song. It's your fault that you don't know it, or like at least enjoy it. You know what I mean? It wasn't made to make fun of us. It was made to celebrate how ridiculous our culture can be sometimes.
Yes. And actually that leads me to a question that it's one of the things that I've found much more elaborated and complex for me, I think one of the most multi-layered of your videos, which is the one about problematic nicknames. Which is what I think what that video reveals, which is something that I think really takes comedy to satire, which is you can still make all these comments about social cultural differences and contrasting without condoning prejudice or problematic issues in your own culture, right? So How, tell me a little bit more about that vision. I mean, you're contrasting, you're in a way, I wouldn't say celebrating, but, showcasing something that it's real. But at the same time, the video clearly, and as many others, they do not condone the prejudice that is behind it, right? So how do you approach that?
Well, making a video condoning something is, I've tried to do it in the past and sometimes it's been successful. The majority of the times people just don't want to be preached to. So it's a way of sending a message as like a piece of candy, like a medicine covered in candy. That video came about because those friends of mine, Alejandro and Angelo and I, we lived in New York. We're from Venezuela, and we really struggled. Like there's things about the way that we talk to each other and the way that we talk about like our friends from back home that is just like inappropriate here. And the fact that it's inappropriate and the fact that we overlap in understanding the nuance of what this is, but also how messed up it is in this culture, makes us feel very alone and makes us feel like we don't really belong anywhere. Because I don't feel comfortable calling, one of my cousins a disco rayado because they have a lisp or a stutter. Like, that's kind of complicated for me now. But I also understand the other side, which is like, well, Americans can't really tell me what words to use in my culture. So there's this vacuum of like identity crisis because it's a space I don't feel comfortable in. And discomfort tends to be a really good and fertile place for comedy. So I don't think I started making that video saying I'm condemning this. I'm more like, don't you think it's a little weird we do this and we don't really talk about it? Is anyone else feeling this? Because a fish doesn't know it's in water. When you're in the culture, you don't realize how messed up it is, really. And then it only is until you leave that culture that you start pointing and saying like, this is weird. It's weird we do this. So yeah.
Which I think it's also part of a statement of saying, I can showcase and show problematic aspects of my culture, and I can, we can talk about what it means without really, and at the same time, even directly or indirectly, you can criticize some of the negative traits that are inherent to that. It's not, it doesn't have to be black and white, I see, and that's why I always find it more interesting about more complex satire like that, no?
Discomfort, right? Versus like anger. Yeah. Making comedy out of anger is also very easy, but it is more draining. There's something so funny about discomfort because it's so human. Like it's not as intellectualized. Discomfort is just like a guttural feeling. And it's such a fun place to live in when making comedy.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the first thing that I watched that I ever really got me into satire as something, this is even more powerful than other kind of more politically correct things, was when I watched any of Sacha Baron Cohen's stuff.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Late 90s, early 2000s. And that was, I think, pioneer in that sense. Let me talk about one thing that actually I had at the beginning, because, but I've seen that all the interviews start with that. So I didn't want to start with that, which is really one of the core issues, as you have already kind of suggested in many of your answers, is your intersectional identity. So you're Venezuelan-American, from, Jewish Venezuelan-American. You've described yourself even as a Jutina a few times, which I think it's a hilarious name for that. But even within that, the whole long list of immigration history in your family, from that comes from escaping the Holocaust to escaping Cuba, and then immigrating to Venezuela, then immigrating from Venezuela to the US. So there is a lot of that, and you found your own intersectional identity as, as a Venezuelan-American, Jewish, women, white, all these kind of things. How has, now from this distance and all the content, and after all the content that you've produced, how do you see the role of your intersectional identity as a part of your comedy or your satire?
It's funny because even my astrological sign isn't clear because I was born on a cusp. So I don't know if I'm Pisces or Aries. Like there's nothing about me that's clear. I'm a Jew, but my mom isn't Jewish. So I'm like a Muggle Jew. I'm Venezuelan, but I just recently did a show with a Venezuelan comedian, and I couldn't keep up with like the Venezuelan, pop culture facts. I felt like so out of it. I'm American, but then when I traveled to South Carolina, I was like, what? I'd be lying if I said it was, easy all the time. But as we've said, discomfort is the best place to create comedy, and this discomfort of not really understanding myself and not feeling comfortable ever, is a very privileged place to make comedy. And we talked about it earlier, which is perspective and point of view are really important in creating comedy. And, when you have an intersectional identity, the cons are you're never fully 100% anything and you'll constantly miss something. The pros are you have many vantage points from which to see things. So I probably wouldn't have known that the Venezuelan birthday song was so absurd if I didn't have this vantage point of many different points of view and culture. So it's almost like a video game. And every time I play a video game, I feel so like poetic. But I was playing a Zelda, and there's these like big, huge mountains that you like fly to, and it like helps you see where everything is at. And I remember playing the game and turning to my husband one time and being like, this is what I feel sometimes, is what it's like to be me. Like to get to this vantage point, it's so hard. You have to like truck through the forest and like climb forever. But then once you're there and once you're like, oh, I'm comfortable in this, look at everything I can see. So I think, and I speak for a lot of comedians and a lot of digital creators, intersectionality also comes into play in our careers. A lot of us in the past, people were just TV writers or they were just stand-ups. And then there's an intersectionality of how we create comedy now. Digital creators, on camera, stage performers, like people have to kind of do it all. And it's tough to respond to the question, what do you do for a living? And it's linked to, it's very similar to the identity question. But again, it's difficult. It makes life, I think, a little bit more complicated, but there's huge benefits in understanding all of these different worlds. Yeah.
Let me switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about another area of your work. When you were, starting your career, like around 2015, there was a switch of certain type of contents because two things happened. Trump was run for election and was elected, and then the other one was the increasing humanitarian crisis in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And some of the contents became much more political. You did some very political contents that are particularly interesting and rare within the Latinx comedy world here. So let me start with the first one. How do you think that the election and government of Trump affected your comedy, your work?
Oh, that was a chasm. That was a big chasm for, I think, a lot of comedians. Oh God, it was such a difficult time because I think very few things made me feel more isolated in the world than that, because a lot of Venezuelans were pro-Trump, a lot. And I was very much not. And I felt like it was impossible to ignore what was happening. And it would have been inauthentic for me not to make content around things of political nature. I couldn't. It was something that was worrying me so much, and that stirred up a lot of discomfort in me again. and that discomfort needed a vehicle. But it was a really complex situation, because when you make a video that just celebrates culture, you can get hate, and you can get people who don't like you, or racists or anti-Semites, but that's kind of like an easy brush. It's like, okay, well, bye. Things of political nature hold and just so much feeling and hatred, and it was very challenging, because I felt a release of me feeling like I was doing the right thing, and expressing what I thought was right, and what I thought was wrong. But that also brought forth a lot of questions of my identity, because Venezuelans were now hating me for standing up for what I thought politically. But then when I spoke about Venezuelan politics, a lot of Americans would not fully understand and grasp what I was talking about, and would be filled with hate as well. So it made me realize how toxic the internet space is in the political conversation. It also made me feel very alone in my intersectionality. Felt like the bubble of people that understood my point of view from in that type of content became this. And I made a video where I spoke about how hard it was to be a Venezuelan-American in Trump's America. That's a pretty small amount of people. A democratic Venezuelan-American in a liberal state in Trump's America. I think that like maybe 100 people. I don't know.
What did you do that video? Who did you do it for?
I did it in 2018 on my platform, and I think it's called like Venezuelan-American, being Venezuelan-American, like something like that. I did it with my friend Tulio. I basically did that video as like catharsis. And then I got a lot of people saying, I've been afraid to express my opinion because of exactly what you're saying here. I feel like the American left will like hate me for saying I don't stand for Maduro, even though he's a dictator. The Venezuelan right hates me because I don't like Trump. I don't belong anywhere. I don't know where I belong. I felt ripped out of my comfort zone of this intersectionality.
Well, that actually, and that was the other question about. Then you had the issue of Venezuela, which at the time was becoming more and more awful. The whole humanitarian crisis, the massive exiles all over the world from millions of Venezuelans, and you did some videos. You did videos of that, and then your tone started switching, which had already started with Trump, right? It was becoming more and more serious too, which is also an interesting place for a comedian, I guess. Like you did that op-ed at the New York Times. What my fellow Democrats don't understand about Venezuela, right? Something like that, which was really, I think, trying to portray exactly what you said before, which is, okay, so I'm a Democrat, Venezuelan-American in the US. I have already criticized Trump very much. I'm very clearly stand against all these kind of prejudice and bigotries. At the same time, this is an awful left-wing government, authoritarian and corrupt, that has affected millions of people, including my family, and so it's very personal, it's very social too. So, how did you navigate this polarization around it? What did it mean for you to do that switch from humor to seriousness?
I kept trying to find ways of making it funny, but I just like couldn't. Like at my heart, like I just like couldn't do it. I think the job of a comedian, and I think la mayoría del trabajo, even though our job is to make people laugh, I'd say a lot of our job is to simplify complex things into a line or into a video, whether that be simplifying how you feel in an airport into a joke, I maybe took away the humor of some of this, but my intellectual process of making comedy is simplification. So in that time, what I said was, all right, let's just do the simplification element, because the humor is just very hard to figure out where the humor should go. I don't like ever punching down. I don't like making fun of people. I like punching up. If I'm going to make fun of someone, it's someone that's in power. It's someone that holds more power over people and over me. That's a hard and complicated place to navigate when it's a huge humanitarian crisis and people are dying. And I'm so frustrated because people don't understand what's happening. Like, it was just a time where me quité la careta, where it's like, I'm a person too. I can't be funny all the time. And I tried to sprinkle a couple of jokes in the New York Times op-ed piece, but that was after a lot of drafts. So it was hard. It was an impossibility of a situation, I think. And I think I handled it. I probably would have gone about it differently now. But at the time, I just felt the need to simplify and help people understand.
How do you think polarization still affects comedians' work? Because I mean, you started talking about it a little bit before when with the election of Trump and all these kind of issues, but really, it seems to be a big condition, and for artists in general, I think for journalists, for artists, for writers, but I think comedians particularly would feel that as this sort of force that is kind of interpolating your work constantly, right? Yeah,
you can't really win people over. I've said recently, like, politics in Venezuela and politics now in the States, and I've seen it progress this way. It's almost like religion, where people believe something and that's their identity and that's their belief system. And challenging it means challenging basically God. It's what it feels like. That's what I felt like in Venezuela. I feel it here now in a lot of ways. And there's just a group of people I know will never like me. The thing is, I saw people stop liking me here. Like, I had a lot of Venezuelans stop liking me because I expressed my opinion against Trump. They hate me now. Nothing I make will ever get them to like me again, because I spoke against their God. And I'm not beyond that either. If someone said they loved Trump or loved Maduro, I would have a lot of trouble consuming their work, to be honest with you, because I feel like it stands against my point of view and my morals. But it's just the reality of the world we live in. And unlike times in the past, we live in a world where we're so interconnected, where I interact with these people every day. These people in Fort Lauderdale that I probably would never seen in person and would never have a conversation with, send me what they think about me. And, the beauty of the internet is I've connected with millions of people. Bad side is that all these people that very much disagree with me have the ability to tell me how much they disagree with me.
Well, another thing that I think this has changed since the time that you were doing videos about gender issues and feminism, but I think particularly at the time when you were doing these videos, that was still a polarizing topic too,
Yeah.
And I know in Latin America, many feminist YouTubers receive so much hate and insults and sexist aggression. So what do you think now how has it changed the role of gender and sexism in your work and in entertainment media in the US and the Latino community over these years since you started doing
I think it is getting better. I think a lot of what I receive is sexism and I just don't realize it is. Like, it isn't something that is gone. I started making Joanna Rants dress. I would dress a certain way and present a certain way because I did not want to be judged on my body or my gender. And that was a very conscious decision. And even though I tried, I would still receive a lot of sexist vitriol and hate. And then the moment I started talking about feminism, so funny to see how angry men got. It was like, I'd be like, I think just women need to be treated the same. And then I just get like, what the fuck? And it's like, bro, what? And I'm like, oh my God, men are so weak, honey. You guys are really the weaker gender. Like, relax. Like, I guess now there's so many more women online. When I started, there were a lot of incredible female creators, but as I worked a lot with YouTube, and a lot of YouTube's push was to put more female creators on like showcase them, because a lot would turn away from the platform because of the amount of sexism they would receive, unless they were like beauty bloggers, which, caters more specifically towards a female audience. Now I have a theory, which I don't know if it's true, but like, I think when I started comedy online, vlogging personality-based stuff was like king. So who you were and what you shared and you bringing people into, your house and stuff was like content. Now with like TikTok and stuff, it's less personality driven. And I think that takes the weight off a creator a little bit. And it's just like, they could just make insane random comedy. And it doesn't matter. It's just like an independent piece of content that isn't linked to this persona that has to be like catering to people. I think that might have opened doors to more diverse folks, because who you are can inform your content, but it isn't as personally linked to just a funny video you want to make. So I think this new Gen Z and like their platforms, and I think they're also less prejudiced probably in a lot of ways than perhaps other generations. But I think that platform, that short form content platform, I think allows for people to experiment more and be present.
What do you think are still some of the main issues to be addressed from this, from the gender perspective? Are there still issues pending? Have they become more elaborated, sophisticated? Or they're still the same issues as always?
I mean, I think they're still the same issues. I just think people stand up for the right things more. Like my followers I get like a sexist tweet and my followers will, defend me or defend other females. I go out and defend other females or queer folk or non-binary people. People just trying to exist in the world and make their stuff, and then getting hate for it. I think that's been helpful. I don't know how to solve it. Other than building a community of people that think like you. Like, I used to believe that the more followers you have, the better. And I don't agree with that anymore. I think it's the more followers that align with you and that stand for what you might stand for. That's like gold. It really is gold, because you don't feel like, when you're online, you almost feel like you're on a stage and people who would never even want to see you are watching you, and having people that would want to see you reminds you that you're worthy and that, you're talented or funny or smart or whatever, because you have people that tell you the opposite, and just based off how you look or what gender you are. Learning and disassociating that from your own personal worth is something I learned in my 20s. It took a long time. but I think it's a learning process and a learning curve. Yeah.
Okay, let me finish with one last question. I read in a few interviews when you talk about your comedy references, and I thought it was very interesting that not only you, like I think most of comedians, even in Latin America, not only Latinx in the US, most of their main comedy references are American or British. No, you talk about The Office, I think the British version, and of course, from Woody Allen to Louis C.K. I guess you do mention a lot of the Jewish American tradition of comedy, but also, Saturday Night Live and Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. So what is your own perception of of any references of Latin American or Latino comedy in the US? Like, has there been anything that influenced you that, but that you have used in some sort of way in your work?
Latino comedy in the US?
Or Latin American.
I think a lot of it's come recently. I've seen a lot. I swear, I think it's because of the internet. I think I probably wouldn't have been exposed to a lot of the people I love seeing if it wasn't for the internet. One, because, media, like the media industry has a problem representing Latinos accurately. There's just a lot of like hurdles that people have to do that maybe other people that identify something else maybe don't. Like, there's just not a lot of like Latino content out there that is made by CBS, NBC, ABC, Netflix, whatever. Now Netflix is actually becoming a lot bigger in that sense. It's becoming more international. So I think now I'm seeing a lot of people that I really enjoy their content. El Cuartico is like a sketch comedy group, Venezuelans in Mexico. Laureano Marquez is a big comedian from Venezuela, but I feel like I've gotten closer to his content and his comedy through the internet. Richo Faril is a very hilarious Mexican comedian that I just like started following him on YouTube, and I think he's so talented and so charming and so funny. There's just Jenny Lorenzo, who's my podcasting co-host. The only reason she's my podcasting co-host is because I started following her content. I don't think the reason I saw to the States and England and whatever as, humor, tent poles, I don't think it was purposeful. I think it was just, I just didn't have the exposure. I didn't have the access to people that perhaps align more towards my comedy in Venezuela. And I didn't know Chilean comedians or Argentinian comedians or Mexican comedians. Now I do. And then now here in the States, there's this, renaissance of, I think, Latino content. And, I'm lucky enough to have been able to meet them and know them, and they do influence my work. And I'd love to work with them to make that ABC, NBC, or Netflix show.